So in this video I will show you the modifications that I did to the idler body. So I'm going to isolate the idler assembly right here. And so I've shown you previously the modifications I've done to the idler, which were bigger bearings and replacing the metal rod right here with a 3 printed one, so that you don't need to buy any extra rods, and replacing that bearing inside the idler into a bearing mount on the idler body. I am currently doing another modification which I've not included in the video, which is making the tolerances in the motor shaft mount a little bit bigger, because I had problem fitting the motor on the previous model. So now what I'm going to do on the idler body is, as I said before, making a bearing mount, um, and also reducing this end stop size, because as you've seen in the previous video, because I'm using bigger bearings, I need to make this end stop a lot smaller, but it still works. So I'm going to make it a lot smaller, a few millimeters large, and also make this hole for the motor right here a little bit larger, so that I have enough space to assemble the thing, because now we're not using a rod that we place. We have to slide it first through the hole, then inside the bearing, and then place the motor. So it's a bit trickier to assemble, but with these modifications it should be pretty straightforward. What we're going to do now is look at the differences in the two Cad files. So let me minimize this. Okay, so on the left you have the new one, and on the right you have the original one. So you can obviously see the shorter stop end here and the modifications. Now let's dive into the code and see what's actually different. So the first difference is on the outer cylinder here, that is, let's say, defining how large the borders are. So on this one it's much smaller, since it's simply to house a rod, and on this one it's bigger because it has to house a bearing. So you can see right here it is 7 millimeters in radius, and on the new one it is 15 millimeter in radius. The second difference is on the, let's say, inner cylinder. So on this one it is much smaller, and on this one it's much bigger. Of course, it's because we're using a rod on this one and a bearing on this one. And you can see here that, so on the old one it was 2.55 millimeters in radius, so you have 0.1 millimeters in clearance. And on the new one I'm using 11.1, so you might notice that the clearance for the bearing is slightly bigger, but since I want to print this without any supports, it might sag down a bit, and the bearing, so it's going to be a tighter fit. So this is why I have a bigger clearance than on my previous model. Okay, now another difference in my design is the size of the end stop. So the original one is way larger than this one. So as you can see, we have moved the new one a bit to the left compared to this one. So here we translate it -1, so it's going to move a little bit to the right on my screen at least. And here translate 10, so it's going to be 10 to the left. So it's 11 millimeters further left than the previous one, and now we have made it also way shorter. So here it's 22 millimeters, and here it's only 2 millimeters, so it's 10 times shorter. So yes, it might not work as well, but I think that it will do the job. Now there are not any other differences for the end stop. This is the only thing I've modified. Now we'll take a look at the simple modification of making the motor hole bigger, so that we can assemble the thing way easily. Okay, and in order to do this modification, what you need to do is edit in either body space, the radius of the second cylinder, which is the hole for the motor mount, and it is 11.5 millimeters on the official version, and on my edited version it is 14 millimeters, so they can fit the assembly. So what I will do now is I will show you the final result. Okay, so this is the final product. It printed flawlessly, as you see. I'm going to show you the different step that I went through in order to have that result, because I went through multiple prints in order to have it work. So this is the original print. This is my second print. I realized I had to increase the motor hole size, and the bearing mount was too small. Uh, the second print, the third print actually, was an attempt at a print, because I had a clogged nozzle, so I changed it and then reprinted it, and it worked. Well, not that well, since the bearing mount broke because I had forgotten to save my changes. So on the next print, I also increased the bearing size way too much. So the bearing mount didn't break, but it was too big, so the bearing was wobbling inside. And this is the last and final print, which works perfectly. So as you can see, I don't have the idler in it yet because I'm reprinting it with bigger clearances for the shaft.